ourselves set up technologically here. I apologise. I think some of you have been waiting since perhaps 7:30 because one of the Zoom invites had the wrong time on it, but we were planning to go live at 8. So we'll just wait a few more minutes and see if some of our other friends can join us. But it's wonderful to see so many people here. It's a good place to be on a Friday night.
It's certainly safe.
And it's certainly warm, at least in my house, Jeff.
Yeah.
Are you in the house that you built at the moment?
No, that's John and Megan. I'm about 500 metres away in the house that I bought, nearly 5 years ago when I moved up from Sydney.
Mm-hmm. So
I could be close by to do the build.
And is it sustainable and eco and passive solar and no?
None of the above.
Is it a regular sort of a place?
That's why I'm building a house in the Eco Village.
Well, I've certainly had a bit of a look in the place you've just finished. Have you actually finished building it?
Yeah.
And it's looking beautiful.
Yeah, it is. In fact, we'll see some of it tonight.
Fantastic. So for those that don't know Jeff, Jeff has just finished building a house made out of hemp. It's been a real labour of love, would you say, Jeff?
Owner builder is always a labour of love, yes.
Yeah, we built a couple of doors up from Jeff and we used a building company, and there were many days that we drove past Jeff and he'd be fine-tuning something, painting the eave linings. That took a while.
That took about a month, yeah.
But they look amazing.
I'm happy with them, yeah.
All right, we'll just give it a couple more minutes. Hopefully everyone's getting set up with, a cup of tea or a beverage or whatever your drink of choice is on a Friday night. Getting the kids settled if you've got kids. Or at least putting on a Friday night movie. We're looking good at this end. Sorry, we're just fiddling around with a few things here. I've got my husband John here on tech support. I should really change that to on running the show.
Yes, Jeff to unmute.
Is Jeff muted? Jeff, are you on mute?
I just unmuted.
Oh, fantastic. Great. We've got people coming through on Facebook as well. We're also going live on Facebook, and some people are preferring to watch on that technology, so that's great. So Jeff, have you got a big weekend or are you going to be working on your house?
There's a food production meeting at the village tomorrow morning, and hopefully we'll get out tomorrow night.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, we might kick it off. I think it's 8 o'clock here. Welcome everybody. My name's Vanessa and I'm chatting with Jeff tonight. Jeff Cameron is a member of the Narara Eco Village, and he also knows an awful lot about our power and our water setup and about hemp houses and about permaculture and sustainable building. And so I thought he'd be a great guy to chat to tonight. As I said, I'm supported by John here on tech support. And Jeff, do you want to just give a bit of an intro to yourself and your interest in sustainable building?
Yeah, thanks Vanessa, and welcome everybody. Always proud to present on our Eco Village, which I think is a wonderful project to be involved in. I go way back to Uni of New South Wales, Bachelor and Masters in Applied Science, careers, food technology, biotechnology, and then information technology. And moved up from Sydney to the Central Coast about 5 years ago to become hands-on involved in the Eco Village project, where I got involved in the design of the civil works and then the construction of the civil works, which is power supply, electricity and water, roads and bridges, the subdivision, and then I got heavily involved in the application to New South Wales Government to become a water utility, which is regulated by IPART, and that ended up being 1,500 pages of application, highly technical documentation. When they asked for volunteers, I didn't step back fast enough. And I then moved on about 2 years ago, moved on from doing the civil works to building my own house. And I did put it out to tender to builders, but nobody could give me a price on a hemp house who I was happy to actually give the job to. So that's the only reason I ended up doing owner builder myself. And that took about 1.5 years, and we completed the job earlier this year and have been doing landscape and gardening up until right about now. And the job is just about done. In the meantime, I've actually put some tenants in who are, it's a family who are members of the Eco Village, and they're living there while they get started building their house, because I've got one just 500 metres away where I am tonight. And it just worked out better under the Eco Village, under the virus lockdown, for them to be in the new house and me to stay in the old one. So that's me.
Fantastic, thanks, Jeff. So for those who have just joined us, we're talking sustainable building design with Jeff Cameron tonight. Jeff, we've already had a bit of a chat a week or two ago when we looked at a big presentation that you've done about the Eco Village and the building standards in particular here. So we're hoping tonight to actually take you guys on a bit of a tour of some of the houses that have been built here. And Jeff will take you through some of the sustainable features of them. If you have questions, as usual, we invite you to ask them using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And Jeff, depending on what questions come through, I might interrupt you, or I might just let you go through the village on this tour, and we'll take questions at the end.
Okay.
Take it away, Jeff.
Well, I'm going to do a slideshow. Normally, we do an open day where we do a tour of the village and we walk around and look at the buildings and talk about them. So tonight we're going to do a virtual tour. So I've been around in the last 2 weeks and photographed all of the sustainable buildings, and we're now going to work our way through them as though we were walking around the village. That'll take maybe 20 minutes. And after that, we can then all have chats with questions and answers about the things we've seen in the walk around, and also in the sustainable building theory that I put a video out on about a week ago, which I guess you could say was your homework before tonight. So what I'm going to do is actually share my screen and work through the slideshow. Okay.
Yeah, that looks great. There we go.
Happy with that? Excellent. So this is the front gate of the village. The site's 150 acres, which was horticulture research for about 80 years before we bought it from the state government. And about a quarter of the site zoned for residential, which is where we're planning to houses. We're already done the subdivision on the first 60 lots. So that's underway. So as you can see, it's a beautiful site surrounded on 3 sides by conservation forest. It's a beautiful valley with a creek running through the middle of it. And the first house you come to as you go through that big front gate is one of the most interesting on site. It's actually an earthship designed, which was built by one of our members named Candy. Earthship has, as you can see, that's the north wall you're looking at, all glass on the north wall. Then there's an internal wall, and to the south of that internal wall is all of the living areas. The front wall you're looking at is rammed earth, which is a beautiful material. And the south wall, which is the back of the building, is all used tyres. And lots of other materials, bottles for coloured glass, all sorts of things in this design. And if you look inside that north glass wall, you can see all the plants that are growing there, and right down the far end you can actually see Candy, who did own a builder very bravely and has done a fantastic job. This is the south wall of that house, and you might just see sticking out of the grass a couple of big openings of pipes. It actually has ground coupled ventilation to stabilise the temperature. This is a big pipe which runs about 20 metres underground, and you suck air in, And by the time it gets into the house, the temperature's been stabilised. So in summer it'll come in cool, and in winter it'll come in warm. And it's almost zero energy. So it's a very sustainable form of heating and cooling. And you can see that there's some beautiful features in that building. And right next to it, only arrived about 2 weeks ago, was a Queenslander, which it's a genuine 1930s from Ipswich in Queensland, was cut into pieces, loaded on trucks and delivered to site. And there's now going to be quite an extensive job to refit the inside to turn it into a sustainable building. So it's got sufficient insulation and thermal mass to be comfortable without excessive energy use. And of course, right next to it is a much more conventional design, light timber frame, concrete slab on ground. And as of today, about half the cladding's on that, so it's going up very quickly. And the next thing you come to is our cluster of 18 townhouses. Out of the first 60 lots in the stage 1 subdivision, there are 42 blocks of land where members build whatever they want, provided it complies with our sustainability criteria. But the village itself is building 18 townhouses to completion for those members who don't want to build their own. And you can see the lower group are almost complete, and the top group running up the hill are well underway. All of those lower ones, 2-storey top and bottom, they're quite small. The ones up the hill are bigger. And these were designed by Envirotecture, who are really good sustainable architects, thoroughly recommended. And I actually used them for an hour, bought an hour of their time to help me with the design of my house on the detail of the sustainability issues. The next house belongs to David and Lyndall Paris. Some of you may know Lyndall Paris. She's the lady who, on the occasion of her 50th birthday, decided she would build a sustainable community. 20 years later, it exists. And all that you see in this tour and all that's happening in the village has arisen from an idea that she came up with on her own 20 years ago, which is an extraordinary example of the power of an idea. And that's a hempcrete house. And her husband, David, had a career in Snowy Hydro and then AGL Energy. And as you can see, there's about 10 kilowatts of PV panels already on their roof. And this is the oldest dwelling on site. We call this the Heritage House. It's about 100 years old. It was actually used as a boys' home between the wars. And a couple or a family who are members of the village are now painstakingly restoring it to former glory, but also to greatly improve its sustainability and thermal performance. So that's a beautiful house, that one. And just peeping over to the right-hand side there is mine. So this is the house that I've just spent 1.5 years building out of hempcrete. And you can see, you're looking, there's a lot of glass to the north, a little bit to the east, which is where the view is, and not so much to the south and none to the west. And it's designed around a very large north-facing roof. That was the primary starting point of the design of the house. And that's currently got 11 kilowatts of panels on it, and it's got room for 20 kilowatts. So basically it's a power station with some bedrooms. As you can see, there's a lot of permaculture going on in that garden, and I'm responsible for almost none of that. John and Megan have moved in with, and their family, and John is a wonderful gardener, and he's done pretty much everything you see there, including just on the right-hand side are some wicking beds, which came from Kim Bricky in northern Sydney, and they're great. And this is the western wall of my house. As you can see, there are no windows. And council rejected the design on the grounds that there were no windows. So we had that fight with council and eventually we won. The house has actually been designed by an architect with a PhD in sustainable architecture, and the assessor at council was actually a trainee assessor. So it was a bit of an unfair fight in the end. So we did offer to draw a window if they absolutely insisted, because it was only for aesthetic reasons that they believe they have to have a window. And you can see the driveway is actually grass. It's got plastic reinforcing, but that's turning out really well, bit of an experiment. And on the left-hand side of the picture, you can see a tiny house. Because of COVID isolation issues, John has bought the tiny house so he can isolate himself if required from the rest of the family. So that's an interesting addition to the village. We in fact now have 3 tiny houses, and there was a presentation on tiny houses by the village not so long ago. And this is an interior view of the house. And what you're looking at in that far wall is the exposed hemp, which is a beautiful material. It's high performance, stores embodied carbon, highly insulating, but it's really nice to look at. If you do a good job of installing it, then you don't need to finish the inside. You can do if you want with a lime render. This is just bare, except for a clear, breathable sealant. And of course, one of the benefits of the hemp wall is the entire wall is breathable. But in this case, that little box right in the middle of the top is heat recovery ventilation, which is just a tube with a ceramic block and a fan. And it's only a little fan, only draws as much power as a phone charger. And you run that 24/7 when it's very cold in winter and when it's very hot in summer. And in winter it blows in warm air, and in summer it blows in hot air by the magic of heat exchange. As you can see, there's a wood burner stove, which is the only heating in the house, and there's a fan, which is the only cooling in the house. And it's performing wonderfully. Big slab on ground, double glazed everywhere, and the timber around those windows and doors is actually Murray River red gum, which is a beautiful timber. And the next house, I should get Vanessa to introduce this one. This is Vanessa and John and family. This is their house. Do you want to do this bit, Vanessa?
I wasn't planning on it, but what we've built here is a 3-bedroom house, and it's built out of straw panels, which are basically, it's kind of like a prefab way of building with straw. The panels come on the back of a truck, and then they're bolted together, and they're basically a timber frame with compressed straw, and then a single coat of render on both sides. And we are not on a slab here. We've got floorboards which we've insulated ourselves underneath, and we're very comfortable. We haven't needed a heater this winter, and we don't need aircon in the summer. Yeah, but what are you going to say about it, Jeff?
Well, I was going to say the straw panels are quite a recent innovation, manufactured in a factory, stood up on site as a complete wall, and then finished with render. And on the outside, I know there's lime render. I put some of it there. And some of the internal walls are cob, which is a really interesting material, which is basically gravel held together with clay and held up with wire mesh in a timber frame, and then rendered both sides. So it's great thermal mass and very low energy to produce. And as you can see, Vanessa and John have got that garden humming because they haven't been there very long, so they've done well. Right, and right across the road, Tony and Teresa proudly standing on their balcony. It was actually the first house finished in the first stage of the village. And that's a fairly conventional light timber frame, CFC cladding, but they have a full-blown heat recovery ventilation system, which is the ducted system, which is quite common in Europe. So they've got a very comfortable climate inside. Very happy with the way their house is performing. And as you can see, their garden is looking fantastic. They're great gardeners. Next to them, this is actually straw bale. So as opposed to Vanessa's, which is a straw panel, which is thinner, this is the full thickness straw bale ground floor, and then a lighter construction top floor. Which is an interesting combination, looks really good. And just peeking through behind is a second tiny house. So we've got them scattered through the village. And next to that, not yet complete, but well underway, is Sharon's house. And you're looking at a beautiful rammed earth wall there. The artisans who did that did a magnificent job. But it is quite a large house, lots of different materials. You can see cladding on the left and timber in the middle. And if we just drop to the next one, that's a bit of a detail. There's some mud bricks underfoot, which are used elsewhere in the village as well. We have a group of members who've got together and started their own mud brick manufacturing. And the smiling face is Sam, who's the builder. Lovely guy. And I asked him for a comment on this build and he said epic. It's taken a while. It's been a long process, and he's done a wonderful job. And right next door is, yeah, you might well wonder. This is Earthbag Construction. Earthbag is basically sausages full of dirt stacked on top of each other to make a wall. They're actually held together with barbed wire, and you can see a little round door that's beginning to appear right in the centre there, and there's a round window on the left. And if you wonder what all of this is going to end up looking like, have a look at this. The part of the structure you were just looking at is on the left-hand side at the bottom there. So there's a little round window, a little round door, and another window above that, which is also round. If you think this looks like a hobbit house, you're right. That's exactly what it's meant to look like. So this is Linda's Hobbit house, and it's going to be amazing when it's finished. It'll take a while. There's a lot of work in it, and Linda is doing owner builder, and it's quite an education process to build a house like this as owner builder. But you know, fabulous. You know, all power to her arm for taking this one on. And then at the other end of the scale is Jeff Smith's modular house. This was built at a factory 3 kilometres up the road from the village, delivered on trucks in pieces and assembled in about 3 hours. And yes, it is sustainable. It is highly insulated, thermal mass, double glazing. It's an energy efficient house. But it's just another approach. So we've got all kinds of different approaches in our village, and more to come. In stage 2, which we've just gone to council for the application for a subdivision application, development application, we've reserved some larger lots, about 7 or 8 larger lots where we are big enough, we hope we'll be able to do co-housing type development. There's not an actual co-housing code in Australia or no such zoning, but we're working on it. And what we're looking at now is the floodplain area. So the as you look from the front gate, the left-hand slope of the village is where all the houses are. The centre of the village is this floodplain. Then there's Narara Creek, which is that big line of trees. And then on the far side, there are some 3 large fields, one of which is just peeping through on the left-hand side of the picture. And then there's the Strickland Forest surrounding. And as you can see down on the floodplain, there's a row of glass houses, greenhouses, shade houses, which are fantastic facilities left behind by the research station. So this is the inside of the first of those glass houses, which we've restored, growing lots and lots of landscape plants, a misting irrigation system. And underneath those benches, we found is the perfect place to do shiitake bogs, which have been humming along nicely. And there's a big shade house, and as you can see, it's perfect for hardening off the seedlings and bringing up potted plants, striking new plants, that sort of thing. And we're doing, you know, thousands of plants for our landscaping, for our gardens, and for our food. So that's a big activity these days. We also have cornered one of those greenhouses for our timber maturation. We do our own milling. We've got our own Lucas mill. We've got big stacks of logs, which we've either from our site or brought in from the local tree loppers. And we're doing lots of milling of beautiful timber. We've also taken one of the, what's a 3-span, used to be a greenhouse, is now open to the sky. And we're doing row crops here on a semi-commercial scale. And right next to that one, this is the second of those spans. This photo was taken 2 weeks ago. On a working bee, we've just made those garden beds. As you can see, there's a chook tractor, and we've got about 14 garden beds to rotate the chook tractor around as we rotate our crops. So that's a brand new development, and we've got about 30 chickens on site already. So lots of eggs. And the third span, which is just in the background there, is earmarked for aquaponics, of which we have a number of members who are quite keen to get going on that. And that the view in the background is looking up the hill at houses under construction. That's the main stage 1 area from the floodplain. And not far away is the famous Scribbly Gum, which we're building up as a food forest area, which is humming along really well also. And of course, no tour of the village would be complete without a visit to our magnificent dam, which we inherited from the state government because it was the irrigation supply for all the horticultural research. We have permission now from the state government to use it for drinking water or for recycled water. And at the moment, we believe we will use it for recycled water. And we're designing a reed bed pre-treatment system, and then there'll be some polishing. And we've already installed the dual reticulation water system to every house in the village so that they receive both drinking water and recycled water. And the recycled water is for toilet flushing, garden watering and that sort of thing. So that's our virtual tour. I will.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you've managed to cover a lot.
And back.
And you've managed to cover some of our really interesting houses as well. Although there's still a couple more that didn't quite make it in there, but it's hard.
Well, they keep building them. Shall I send the screen back to you now?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, we're getting a few questions about how people are going about building with these alternative technologies. There's a question here about whether the village owns these the technologies such as the moulding for building with hempcrete or the moulding for rammed earth, or if not, how are people managing that?
The technology, no. We certainly don't have our own formwork for rammed earth. The formwork for hempcrete is pretty basic. It's just form ply off the shelf. So anyone can do that. We have a hemp mixer in the village, which we own. As I mentioned, we have a mud brick manufacturing production line, which is a commercial scale operation.
And with that's a private enterprise, isn't it? That's not an eco-village enterprise. That's a couple of our members that have started it, as I understand it. Is that right?
That's right. The village, the co-op doesn't own the brick making. It is a little consortium of members who are running that as a business, yes.
And do you want to comment on the heavy metal group?
Well, another consortium of members got together and bought some really cool machinery. The village itself owns a tip truck and a 100 horsepower tractor because we're maintaining 150 acres. But then the heavy metal group went off and bought a bobcat and a digger and a few other bits and pieces, which are really cool to have around the village when we're doing construction work, which we are all the time.
Great. And are you able to comment a bit? You mentioned that you came and you put some lime render on our place. Do you want to explain about how we do the workshop thing with different houses?
Well, many of the houses have involved one or more workshops, including mine. The hemp construction was a workshop, and I'm still astonished at just the concept of 10 people who you've never met turn up to your construction site and build your house for you for free. In fact, they pay you to feed them while they build your house for free. And that is just an astonishing concept. But to be fair, I had volunteered on other hempcrete workshops to get the skills before I did mine. And I'd volunteered on Vanessa's doing lime rendering to get that skill, because on the outside of a hemp wall, you always have lime render, as with many natural materials, including straw panel and straw bale. So there have been lots and lots of workshops all over the village. Things like the it was the dirt-filled bags, that was all done in workshop. Yeah, there's dirt floor. Sharon has a dirt floor, which was a workshop. You name it, workshops everywhere.
Yeah, they're certainly happening all the time, aren't they? And even now, I know with Ben and Carly's house, they're building pretty much entirely out of reclaimed materials, and they've had a constant stream of woofers and members helping them out.
Yeah.
Jeff, I've had a couple of questions here about co-housing and the idea of the common house. And are you able to sort of explain what co-housing is?
Well, common house and co-housing are quite separate. In stage one, we have at least one common house. And what that is a building which is reserved for shared community use. It's not a house to sleep in or to dwell in. It's for crafts and meals and recreation, and the community comes together in that common house to do community activities. Co-housing is quite separate, and by coincidence, my daughter, who designed my house, is right now buying into a co-housing development in Canada. And in this case, it's a multi-storey building with 12 apartments with a sleeping bathroom and a small kitchen. But then the ground floor is all shared communal facilities for lounge, dining, cooking, recreation. So you have a minimal living space to yourself, which is entirely your own, then a large communal space. And that's one form of co-housing. You might have multiple buildings around. In this case, it's one multi-storey building. But it is minimal housing for the individuals and shared common facilities.
Yeah, that's a great summary. I think it's important to note that one of the things that we're trying to do here is encourage people to build perhaps a smaller footprint house than you would ordinarily build out in the suburbs. And we have enough community facilities that we don't need to have a spare bedroom in our house, for instance, because we know that the common house will have a spare bedroom that can be rented out or time shared, if you will. And also we have other community buildings too, don't we, Jeff, that we don't need to replicate, a movie room in our house or things like that.
Well, we have extraordinary communal facilities, most of which we inherited from the state government. Because it was a research station, we had, for example, the central admin building, which contains offices, laboratories, lunchroom, etc., for 100 staff. We have a meeting hall for about 100 people where we do our open days and our village meetings, where we manage our village affairs. We have, as you've seen, glass houses, greenhouses. We have a huge dam, just extraordinary facilities that we've inherited. Thank you to the state government.
Yeah, and it's also been a really great opportunity for us to look at more sustainable ways of renovating buildings, hasn't it?
Indeed.
And we're getting rid of some of the 80s carpet and things like that.
Indeed.
Just one more question about the co-housing thing before we move on. We've got somebody here who has been obviously involved with the village or following the village story for a little while and has heard where we're up to with stage 2, how in stage 2 we're particularly trying to encourage that smaller footprint housing. Are you able to comment, or do you know much about where that stage 2 group is at? There was a group of people talking about how they might get together and kind of share a lot and that sort of thing.
Well, at this stage, we've put the DA into council, which includes, large lots, and with the anticipation and the expectation that we will be able to do co-housing type development on those lots. But until we actually get the DA approved, we can't say for sure that we will. You know, council may or may not want to fight over it. We shall wait and see. Yeah, all we can say is we've asked, we've done the plan, we've explained in detail what we want to do. It's now, you know, the ball's now in council's court for them to come back and say, you know, yes, no, or here are the questions.
Great, thanks, Jeff. All right, whilst we're on the topic of council, a few questions about council. We've got one on Facebook here asking what it's been like to work with the Central Coast Council. Can you talk about that from perhaps a bigger perspective and then your own experience?
Well, I've been involved in the DA process for the subdivision for 5 or 6 years, which is from the beginning. And our original DA for the 60 lot subdivision for stage 1 was approved by Gosford Council, and we had to go through an entire education process with the council because they had no idea what an eco-village was. They didn't know if we were a bunch of pot-smoking hippies or if we were serious. So we took them along that journey and got the approval. We then, halfway through our construction work, which is the $10 million civil contract for the first 60 lots, there was the amalgamation. We got a letter from the Amalgamated Council saying they didn't agree with the approval we had received for the 60 lot subdivision from Gosford. Could we please submit a new DA? At this point, we were halfway through a $10 million contract doing all the civil works for the 60 lots. So we politely declined, and they didn't say anything more about it after we got state government involved. We have now, going through the process of educating the Amalgamated Council, none of whom were the people we dealt with at Gosford. We're now going through the education process of what is an eco-village and what it is we're trying to achieve and what the benefits for the community will be. We shall wait and see how they perform on the new DA. With my own house DA, which I did most of the documentation myself in the end, because my architects took off to Canada shortly after they did the original master design of the house. They weren't too bad. I mean, yes, they came up with 3 objections and we worked our way through them and we got the DA in not, didn't take ridiculous length of time. I really can't say I've had a bad experience with Central Coast Council. We shall wait and see.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And I mean, I can speak a little to that question too about, I found the Central Coast Council to be very prompt in responding to our queries and to our documentation. And they had a similar issue with our house, Jeff, where they wanted us to have windows on the western side. And we were very keen to start building, so we didn't push back too hard on that and have that dialogue, because that can take, a week either side, a couple of weeks either side. And instead we went for the bare minimum. So we have got, I think they're 25 or 30 centimetre wide windows.
Yeah.
On our western wall.
Yeah.
It's a compromise. Let's see, where to from here? Do you mind if we talk about the clusters for a tick? How do the clusters, the townhouses, work in terms of ownership?
It's actually a strata plan. So the 60 lot subdivision we're doing in stage 1 is all under what's called community title. Community title is like a strata plan, except it's horizontal instead of vertical. Strata, you own your apartment and you own a share of the land around the building. With community title, which is what we are, you own your block of land where you're building your house and you own a share in all the land around it, because 3/4 of the site that we bought will be shared. Only 1/4 of the site will be divided into lots for people to build their houses on. So that's community title. But within our site, we have a cluster of 18 townhouses, and that is a strata because there are some 2-story in there. It's not community title, it's strata title. But as with any other strata title, you own your little apartment and you own a share of the land around it. So that's the ownership structure for clusters.
Thanks, Jeff. If we go back to talk about the other Jeff's house down on the floodplain, the one that was built by a modular company,
Yeah.
there's been some interesting feedback. Sometimes when we have tours here, people say, oh, you know, that house doesn't look very sustainable. It looks just like a regular clad house. Are you able to talk to some of the benefits of using a modular building company?
Well, it's funny you should mention modular buildings. I actually spent 10 years working for Australian Portable Buildings before I left Sydney and came to join the project. So I can speak with a little bit of authority on that. Modular buildings are built lightweight so they can be transported on a truck to site. And that's the only real flaw in building a sustainable modular building, is because it has to be light. So you can't have a lot of thermal mass, you know, true thermal mass in a modular building. It just doesn't transport on a truck. And we haven't quite worked out how to put down a slab and then put a modular building on it so that it sits directly on the slab and it's thermally connected to it. I'm sure someone will work that out, but I've never seen it. But apart from that, you can do anything in a modular house that you can do in any other house in terms of sustainability. So you can have as much insulation as you want. You can have recycled materials if you want. You can have low embodied energy materials. You can have heat recovery ventilation if you want. And you can have simulated thermal mass using phase change materials, which is basically a bubble wrap filled with wax, and it melts and freezes around about room temperature. And like the ice in your drink, it either absorbs or emits a lot of energy as it changes phase. So even though it doesn't weigh a lot, it acts as though it did in terms of thermal mass. So yes, a modular building can do pretty much whatever a normally built building can do in terms of sustainability. There's not much limitation there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff. I've just had another question pop up about council, and are you...
Actually, just before you move on, I would just double back on that and say, well, why would you want to do a modular building as opposed to one built on site? And the real advantage in modular is that it gets built inside a factory, so it's not subject to weather. You can build it, you know, regardless of what's happening outside the factory. But also things like the plumber and the electrician have an office right on the factory floor. So the building basically comes past the office and they just take things out of the office and put it in the building. So they never have to go to Bunnings or back to their warehouse or their garage to get all the bits and pieces they didn't remember to bring this morning. It's just much more efficient. And also, as the buildings go through the factory as a production line of buildings, there's very little waste. You design the building so there's not much waste, and then there's buildings coming past, every week anyway, and what doesn't get used on this building gets used on the next one. So those are some real benefits in going modular. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, not at all. Thank you, Jeff. I've had another question about the council approval process. Are you privy to much of what was involved for some of the more alternative building methods like the Earthship and like Linda's house with the earth bags?
Some of them have had a lot of difficulty in getting DA approval and construction certificate approval because they are a bit out there and council have never seen anything like it. I think Linda's Earthship is one of the first 2 or 3 ever built in Australia under DA approval. Candy's Earthship. Linda's Hobbit House has a reciprocal, the round building at the top of that design has a reciprocating roof, that circular roof, and the engineers spent a lot of time trying to convince council that this was going to stand up in the wind. There have been issues over composting toilets versus flushing toilets, whether you can drink your own rainwater, which normally you can't do if you're in an area that's supplied with town water. So yeah, there have been all kinds of issues that have cropped up, in various building designs that have had to be worked through. But at the end of the day, you come to a compromise one way or the other.
That's right. And so much of it, Jeff, as you've said, is about the education aspect. A lot of people haven't come across what we're doing here in our individual homes, and it's quite exciting to, we've had some really positive experiences with council and certifiers, showing them, introducing them to different things.
Yeah. In fact, there was a condition on the DA for my hemp house, which was that at the end of construction, we had to get an engineer to certify that the hemp walls were structurally sound. Which didn't make a lot of sense, because inside a hemp wall is a conventional timber frame which actually holds up the roof, and the hemp itself is not structural at all. It's just basically an insulation material with lime render on the outside of it to keep the weather out. So the question didn't really make sense, and I don't know what the engineer was supposed to actually certify, given the structural bit is timber, which once you put the hemp in, it's completely encased in hemp, you can't see it. And the certifier who asked this question actually inspected the timber frame before the hemp went around it, not the engineer. So none of it made any sense. So in the end, we actually, the supplier of the lime mortar for the hemp is Australian Hemp Masonry Company, and they actually pointed out a study that was done by an engineer on hemp walls in general, saying, they don't affect the integrity of the timber frame, and therefore they're structurally sound. We just sent the certifier a copy of that document, and we never heard any more about it.
That sounds great. It sounds like an easy solution, an easy win.
Well, interestingly, there are other hemp builders with the same certifier in the village who didn't get the same clause in their construction certificate. I don't know why.
Jeff, whilst we're talking about hemp, someone's asked here about hemp insulation. Is that a thing? Do you have it in your house?
Hemp insulation. Okay. In the Hunter Valley, there's, I should know the name of the place, where they're building hemp houses, and they're using insulation, loose hemp, and hemp is the stalk of the hemp plant chopped into little pieces like cork. They're using loose hemp in their ceilings as an insulation. You can even put it under your floor if you can find a way to hold it up as an insulation material on its own. And that's without the lime binder that sticks it together, makes it go solid like a wall. And yes, Shepherd's Ground, that's what I'm trying to think of. Shepherd's Ground are doing exactly that with loose hemp as ceiling insulation.
Very interesting. That's another place that's it's good for a day trip, isn't it?
Yes, I thoroughly recommend that.
All right, somebody's asking here about the rainwater. So we've got approval to have composting toilets.
Yes.
What about drinking rainwater?
Well, we have 2 supplies to each house. One is drinking water, which is currently council supplied. The other is we're just building the process now to bring it out of our dam. Our dam is basically rainwater because it's in Strickland Forest and it's surrounded entirely by pristine forest. There aren't even walking trails in that part of the forest. So basically that's rainwater. But each house is allowed to have rainwater tanks. They're not actually required because we have dam water recycled to each house separately. Under Basics, New South Wales Basics has given us an exemption, the village itself, so we don't have to have rainwater tanks. But as far as I know, every house that's been built has got them because the owner decided they would, and mine certainly has. So that's 3 sources of water. And there has been a change. Under the Plumbing Code of Australia, which we all have to comply with, you weren't allowed to connect your rainwater tank to your drinking water inside your house if there was council water available. Well, that changed about 12 months ago. There was a revision to the Plumbing Code and they just took that out. And there wasn't much fanfare, but Ben, who's building a house in the village, spotted it and has exploited that and got his approval under that new rule. So yes, you can actually connect a rainwater tank to the potable supply. What you can't do is interconnect it so that it might actually end up going down the potable supply and back out the council. So you have to be careful how you actually do the plumbing. where there's no interconnection.
You ask a question.
Sure. All right. Thank you for that, Jeff. Getting a couple of questions here about the costs of building, whether it's more expensive to build an eco house like yours or ours. Have you crunched the numbers? Are you able to comment on that?
Well, I built a sustainable house. I haven't built a non-sustainable house. So I've got a feel for how much additional cost there was in my build. The biggest one would have been the double glazed windows and doors. That the total cost was $57,000. But part of that was the fact that I wanted real timber, and it was Murray River red gum. And I actually ended up going to the Blue Mountains to get them made. I couldn't find a bespoke joinery on the Central Coast who could build hardwood, bushfire compliant, double glazed windows and doors. They just couldn't do it. And because they only use standard profiles, which aren't big enough to take it, I did actually get a quote from one of the local joinery shops for double glazed windows and doors. But when I read the fine print, the gap between the two panes of glass in the windows was 0. They were touching. And they didn't say anything. They just said, here's your quote. So that's why I ended up going to the Blue Mountains, where I did find a joinery, and I know there are at least 2 up there who regularly do hardwood, bushfire compliant, double glazed. And they've done a magnificent job. But that was $57,000 worth. That's the biggest cost really in the entire build. And if that wasn't double glazed, you could probably do it for half the price. So that's a significant chunk of money. It's so comfortable inside the house. I'm really glad I did it. The rest of it, there's really not much expense in upgrading your insulation from R2 to R3 or 3.5. It's $1,000. Concrete slab on ground. I did do slab edge insulation, which is very unusual because the rest of the house is so well insulated, and because there was an exposed edge of the concrete slab, I decided it was worth the effort of insulating that. And the concreter who did the slab has been pouring concrete for 30 years and had never seen it in his life. So that's how unusual it is. But if you're insulating, all of your house, why stop there? You might as well insulate all the way down to ground level. And in fact, in this case, to the bottom of the slab. A little bit of extra there, but not much. That's, again, $1,000 here or there to add a little bit of insulation around your slab. The heat recovery ventilation, you wouldn't do that if you weren't doing a highly insulated house. And not only highly insulated, but airtight as well, which I did myself. I went around every gap and stuck spare bits of insulation into the gap around every door and every window so that it was airtight. So if you're going to go to that trouble, then yes, heat recovery ventilation, and I've got 2 pairs at about $1,000 each of those tube systems. So apart from the windows being double glazed, there's not a huge cost in doing sustainable building. The very low VOC paint, readily available now, not expensive. Low VOC kitchen cabinetry, the starting to become commonplace, not hard to find. Yeah.
Cool. Hey, Jeff.
Hard to think of anything else that was an additional cost due to being sustainable. And the hemp walls, well, if you had to pay for all the labour, that would be expensive. But if you do the labour as a workshop, it works out about the same as a lightweight conventional wall because you're really only paying for the materials. And the hemp in my house came from Dungog in the Hunter Valley. A couple called Bob and Prue Doyle have started up a hemp business. I did hear that they're not currently operating, and I'm not sure why. I'm going to have to follow that up and see what they're doing.
Thanks for that, Jeff. Sounds like you gave a lot of information then. If we jump from the costs of building to bushfires,
yep,
and particularly insurance, are you able to comment about that?
Well, I'm Bell 29 on the north and the west faces, Bell 19 on the south and the east. So I built the whole house to Bell 29. And the insurance haven't said anything about bushfire rating. I guess it's the fact that it's just been completed to the latest standard. They accept that. And there's a big, tarmac road between me and then an APZ. So I'm, a reasonable distance from the nearest source of forest. So yeah, and complying with that, well, there's just a set of rules. You comply with it. The glass in the double glazing is toughened 6 millimetres. All the timber is Murray River red gum or spotted gum or black butt or merbau. They're the Bell 29 compliant hardwoods, so that's what my front deck's made out of, spotted gum and black butt. Hempcrete is not a problem because it's encased in lime. It's basically fossilised, it won't burn. And there's lime render on the outside of that, which won't burn either. And I've got steel cladding and metal roof. None of that burns. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable that the house is about as fireproof as it can be. I don't want to put it to the test.
I shouldn't laugh though, Jeff, because we did have a bit of a bit of a concerning summer fire season, didn't we? There was a fire that was, no one was quite sure how far across it was going to come.
Well, Gospers sat there 20 kilometres away for about a month, and there was 20 kilometres of forest and nothing else between my house and the Gospers fire. So it was a very nervous month, but the wind never blew hard from the west, so it never came.
Yeah.
But it so easily could have.
And I mean, we did have, the Strickland State Forest was shut off to people passing through for a long portion of that. But do you want to comment a little bit about what we as a village did during that time to kind of strengthen our position and, I guess, prepare?
Well, we did do fire drills. We have our own, it's about a 4,000 litre tank and a petrol pump sitting on the back of a big truck, which originally we bought to water the garden plants with, as well as fighting fires. But we are now forming our own bushfire brigade. I've actually been in contact with the fire service as one of the volunteers within the village to start up our own firefighting unit and get our own appliance within the village. And it will be a great comfort when that's actually up and operational. I'm still waiting to hear back from my application to join them. But yeah, we certainly have done drills. We have put in our own fire hydrants throughout the village, which we supply with our own water supply. We've got 450,000 litres of firefighting water sitting on the top of the hill. So it's all gravity fed. We don't need power. We don't need petrol. You just open the valve on the hydrant and the water comes out. So I believe we're prepared, but I don't want to find out.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And that's one of the things I do love about living here is that because we know one another so well, we know what each other's skills are, and we know, who's going to be good in a crisis and what sort of roles people are going to be best in. And I never had that sort of intimacy with my neighbours anywhere else that I've lived.
Yeah, yeah.
Jeff, I've got a bit of a question here that's not so much about sustainable building. I think we might have bored someone here on the workshop because they want to know what else we do that's not just about building workshops. Are you able to comment about perhaps some of the food growing or other activities that we do that are, have a big sustainability focus?
Yeah, well, we did see a couple of slides there of the seedling raising, the potting up of landscape plants, the triple span where we're growing semi-commercial vegetables, and the chook mandala, and the proposed aquaponic systems. And because we've got 150 acres and 3/4 of it is not building, we've got a lot of area and a lot of opportunities for all different kinds of agriculture. And most of the decisions have not yet been made, mainly because we don't have the workforce on site ready to do it. We've got maybe, 15, 20 houses complete on site so far, but those people are busy doing their own landscaping and growing their own veggies around their house before they start looking wider afield. So I can see it will start very soon on a big scale, but it hasn't yet. We're just taking baby steps in terms of food production, but we have a vision for very big in the future. But I can't say I know what it'll look like. Whether it will be food forest, whether it'll involve animals integrated with cropping, yeah, I can't say.
Thanks, Jeff. But as you said, one of the things we do here is we dream big. And there's quite a lot of us now. I think there's, 140 people? So there's a lot of dreams.
About 83, 84 families who are now members of the village. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Jeff, sorry, we're nearly out of time here. I might just point out, I've had a couple of queries about when our next open day is. Now, traditionally, we have an open day once a month where you can come and have a presentation about the village and how it all works. Then you can go on a site tour. You know, COVID-19's thrown a bit of a spanner in the works, but our next open day is the 28th of this month. And there'll be more information about how that format will be on our website. At this stage, we're looking at doing dare I say, themed tours. So if you're particularly interested in the built environment, or if you're particularly interested in what we're doing permaculture-wise in our growing spaces, or if you're a family and you're looking to meet up with other families that might be on the same journey, we're hoping to kind of, you know, get tours going in those particular areas. And so I would invite you to have a look at our website. That's the 28th of June. And since we have been restricted with who we can have on site and the numbers of people we can have on site, we've also been offering private tours, which have been hugely popular. And I think we still have some bookings for the next few weeks. Again, on our website, it's worth having a look at. If you haven't already been, nararaecovillage.com.
I'll be taking tours on the 28th.
Fantastic. So you might get a bit more information about Jeff's house and what he knows about the other houses. I might leave it at that, Jeff, because I think, you know, everyone's got a lot to think about now.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for coming and sharing your time with us on a Friday night.
You're very welcome.
And thank you to everyone that's joined us. It's been a really fun chat tonight. I'm inspired to go and have a look at some of these houses again, actually. So we'll leave it there. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
See you. Good night.
Bye-bye.